The world's reaction to Russia's terrorist strike on Sumy. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, talks about the possibility of a world war if Putin is not stopped now, while Russian narratives prevail in the USA. Unfortunately, at the same time, Friedrich Merz, the future German chancellor, promises to supply Ukraine with long-range Taurus missiles. About this and more, right now, in my traditional briefing. Greetings, friends, I am Alexander Musienko. And at this time, today is April 14th, Monday, we have for you, as always, relevant and important information about events that are truly significant. So, the world is reacting to the strike on Sumy. There is a reaction from leading world leaders, with the exception, at least for now, as of this moment. There is no reaction. There is no direct reaction from President Trump. Well, it will appear. I think we will hear it soon. But instead, there is a reaction from the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who acknowledged that indeed the strike was Russian, that a Russian missile arrived. And as Secretary of State Marco Rubio noted, the strike on Sumy is a tragic reminder of why President Trump is making efforts to end the war. At the same time, President Trump's special representative for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, called the Russian attack on Sumy unacceptable. The attack by Russian forces on civilians, targets in Sumy on Palm Sunday, crosses any boundary of acceptability. This is wrong. That's why President Trump is making every effort to end this war. That is the assessment of the Americans. And now I will provide you with an assessment which in principle is also appealed to by Trump, the head of the Italian Council of Ministers Meloni, and French President Macron. They note that, well, and Andrzej Duda even before the strike, on the eve, he generally noted that Donald Trump is the only one who can end this war and who can put pressure on Putin. But I just wanted there to be a comparison, noting what the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, states, as well as how her assessment is determined. So, Ursula von der Leyen emphasized the need for urgent, decisive actions to cease fire in Ukraine. Europe will continue to reach out to partners and maintain strong pressure on Russia until a just and lasting peace on Ukraine's terms is achieved, she noted. That is, we need to compare that indeed the pressure on Russia is what we demand, what we strive for, and what would be right. And only in this way can the conditions truly be achieved to stop the war. Assistance to Ukraine, pressure on Russia. And at the same time, the reaction of the USA and some European countries, which note that the war needs to be stopped. That is, they are not talking about putting pressure on Russia, but simply that the war needs to be stopped. And Donald Trump, the president of the USA, is right in this. Here is a change in reactions. Thus, from the point of view of assessing the reactions of world leaders, it can be said that the pendulum has somewhat swung. If it was a year or two ago, it was said that no pressure needed to be put on Russia and Ukraine needed to be provided with everything necessary so that official Kiev would have a position of strength at the negotiation table, so to speak. Well, here we see that there is actually a reaction that this war needs to be ended. In what way? Possibly at the cost of concessions from Ukraine, as stated directly, as noted by American representatives Marco Rubio and Keith Kellogg. They did not mention concessions from the Ukrainian side, but we must understand that the general wording can directly imply this, and it can directly indicate just that. Well, friends, while I'm recording this video right now, a comment appeared about the Russian strike, a terrorist attack on Sumy from US President Donald Trump. He commented, the strike and called the Russian attack a terrible thing. This was reported by former Voice of America journalist Ostap Yarish. So what did Trump say? I think it was terrible. I was told they made a mistake, but I think it's a terrible thing. I believe the whole war is terrible, said Trump aboard Air Force One. when he was flying to the airbase. Andrews from Florida from his Mar-a-Lago residence, where he traditionally plays golf every weekend. And this weekend, the American president also unveiled a monument to himself. Well, why not honor himself? And from this perspective, it's a PR strategy by Trump. He draws maximum attention to himself with any informational occasion. For him, this is, let's say, well, we see it as a defining feature, such a reaction that the war is terrible and it needs to be stopped. Russia might have made a mistake. Well, one can draw their own conclusions. In general, it must be stated that the approach has changed, and today indeed it arises. It seems there is a consensus that the war needs to be ended in principle. Here, the most important thing is we are also not against it, but we believe that pressure needs to be applied on Russia. But the United States of America, we see, just wants to end it. This means that they do not rule out methods of pressure, including on Ukraine, with the aim of concessions, in order to, let's say, make certain compromises so that the war ends. We see that there is no drastic reaction regarding the increase of aid packages to Ukraine or the implementation of stronger sanctions against Russia from the United States as of today. I do not rule out that the position may still change, as last week President Trump mentioned that sanctions will need to be imposed tougher against Russia if there are no developments in the matter of peace by the end of April and negotiations. But for now, this is the position. Why did Putin carry out another terrorist attack precisely on Palm Sunday? It's not only because the Russian dictator wanted to inflict as many losses as possible on the civilian population, as it has been clearly established that one of the missiles hit directly on the roadway. Speculation and manipulation that are now emerging, whether it's from the People's Deputy Bazula or from other individuals, about the claim that supposedly Ukrainian military were gathering somewhere and it was unavoidable, and so on. And in general, this is almost the reason for the Russian strike. They are strengthening Trump's position, and initially Trump, because he can later say, yes, maybe the military were gathering there and Russia wanted to strike at the military. Well, a mistake happened and over 30 people died. More than 100 sought medical assistance. Among them, there are also seriously injured individuals. This also needs to be understood. Referring to such thoughts, I will say the following. You know, Putin simply wants to destroy the Ukrainian people. He is interested in genocide. He cares little whether they wear uniforms, whether these people are military or civilians, regardless of that. And secondly, we need to understand that when we hear such calls that there should be no military there should be no military, they have to be somewhere, and so on. Then I have a question. Should everyone just hide underground completely and never come out? But then who will defend the state? And where should they be at all? Where can the military be? They can't be there. Here, if we listen to certain figures, we just need to create demilitarized zones in certain regions, and that's it. But then we must not forget that other military forces will enter there, and there will be a lot of military uniforms. Only the uniforms of the aggressor state, and people in the uniforms of the aggressor state who will commit violence, who will commit war crimes. And all this will turn into Bucha, into Izium, and much into Mariupol, into other cities. Where the enemy occupation took place, no one will be ceremonious, and they won't allow any commentary on various events at all. No opportunity. This needs to be understood. We must honor the dignity and glory of our military. We need to support them, encourage them, and thank them for the daily heroism they perform, including the STO brigades that destroy the enemy, for example, the representatives of the 103rd Brigade who destroyed Don artillery, Korean from North Korea who continue to operate, other brigades that, including those defending our northeastern regions. This is what needs to be understood. We see the reaction. Now, returning to why Putin inflicted a self-inflicted Sunday. Not only because people were going to church or returning. For Putin, it is fundamentally important to do this on such days. This is Passover, a holiday for the Jewish people that has begun, symbolizing the Exodus, symbolizing liberation, the people of Israel from captivity, and the right to their own identity. Establishment. Putin wants to nullify and effectively destroy body, an entire chapter of the Old Testament in the Bible, because for him, it is fundamentally important to demonstrate that none of this matters. Secondly, he wants to make it into a willow palm, Sunday. Why? In order to trample on the symbols of Christianity, to show that people will not be able to be free, will not be able to praise the Lord, and that all covenants about good triumphing over evil must be destroyed. This is a continuation of Satan's interests, meaning Putin, who is directly led by the unclean one, and that's why he does it. It's important for him. He needs sacrifices, sacred sacrifices that he offers to the devil. That's how he thinks. So he needs to shed blood, no matter what anyone says. But I can say that in the State Duma or other state institutions of Russia, various kinds of events often take place. Hearings and discussions about the role of Satanism, the role of religion, and many other things. They interpret religion in their own way. That's why this also happens. Meanwhile, Friedrich Merz, the future German chancellor, noted that Ukraine would need to be supplied with Taurus missiles. These are missiles capable of flying, in particular a range of up to 500 kilometers, and hitting enemy targets. They are launched by air start, launched by aviation. And the goal is clear and understandable: to strike enemy targets. A particular feature of the Taurus missiles is their ability to act and penetrate bunkers, meaning to destroy well-fortified positions of the enemy. This is precisely the significant feature, and this is very important, and this is what distinguishes this missile from the others. It is just as effective as the Storm Shadow, being a competitor. The Storm Shadow is capable of acting, well, let's say, somewhat differently than the Storm Shadow or Scalp G missiles. But the principle essentially remains the same, which is to strike enemy targets, especially at depth, particularly fortified positions that can actually be destroyed. Another question is whether the future German Chancellor Friedrich Merz will be ready to provide Ukraine these missiles without the agreement of the United States of America, or perhaps this decision will also depend on Merz. It is expected that as soon as Donald Trump, the President of the USA, provides Ukraine with ATACMS missiles and gives them the opportunity to strike Russian territory, then immediately, and Germany will make the corresponding decision and transfer Taurus missiles to Ukraine. Here the question remains open. The last time when it was discussed specifically with the previous, still acting Chancellor Olaf Scholz, the issue of transferring missiles to Ukraine, it was mentioned that these missiles will indeed be transferred, but only as soon as directly the United States transfers them. The United States then gave Ukraine the right to strike with ATACMS, but the Taurus missiles never arrived. Scholz remained consistent. He did not transfer them. How it will be here, the question remains open. In contrast, Britain and France acted differently. They did not wait for a decision from the United States of America, but made it independently and transferred Storm Shadow to Ukraine, as well as Scalp and J, which have certain differences. Let's see how it will be this time in this case, but the situation remains, and this question remains open. We really needed Taurus as well as other missiles, like ATACMS, additional Storm Shadow, and Scalp and J, in order to strike, especially on enemy territory, against their military. Meanwhile, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, gave an interview to CBS, one of the leading TV programs on American television. 60 Minutes. This is not the Russian 60 Minutes. Russia, naturally, as often happens, copied it from America. They copy a lot of things. They are not ashamed. They don't invent anything of their own, but then they present it as originally Russian, but they watch the Americans. So, a very good interview, in my opinion. There are episodes of the visit of the head of the Ukrainian state to Kryvyi Rih after the terrible terrorist act and crime by Russia. The strike that took place on a children's playground, resulting in the death of children, and a terrible event. In fact, children died, people were injured, and there is destruction of civilian homes. And overall, the president's comments. Volodymyr Zelensky said that he invited Donald Trump to come to Ukraine to see for himself and witness firsthand how it is possible or not possible at all to conduct any negotiations with Putin from Russia. To verify that as of today, there is the brutality of the Russian regime as the Kremlin continues to commit war crimes and draw further conclusions. The president further stated that there are concerns that if Ukraine cannot stop Russia, then it will begin an escalation that could lead to a world war. If we do not stand firm, Putin will advance further. This is not just speculation. The threat is real. The ultimate goal. The revival of the Russian Empire and the return of territories that are currently under NATO protection. Considering all this, I believe it could escalate into a world war. Absolutely right. The president is appealing because Donald Trump stated that there could be a world war only if Ukraine is supported now. On the contrary, and Volodymyr Zelensky emphasizes that a world war could occur if Ukraine is not supported. If Putin is allowed to go further, because Russia's goal, and this is clearly visible, is not just the occupation of Ukraine, but the expansion of its influence on the countries of the so-called former Warsaw Pact, on the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. Russia seeks to dominate here and as a result, then dominate all of Europe. There are no doubts, none at all. And as the president noted, if this happens, there will be no safe place. No, for anyone in this world. Furthermore, the president of Ukraine expressed regret that Russian narratives prevail in the rhetoric of the White House. I believe, unfortunately, that in the USA, Russian narratives prevail. How can one witness our losses and our suffering? To understand what the Russians are doing and still believe that they are not the aggressors, that they did not start this war? This speaks to the enormous influence of Russia's information policy on America, on American politics and American politicians. Noted the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And he said that President Trump, being a strong president of a strong country, should be on Ukraine's side. I think it's wrong that America wants to be neutral. Absolutely correct. Pragmatic theses from Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, indeed so. Let's see what the White House's reaction will be. So far, it is evident that Trump is not backing down. Evidently, he wants to hear from Steve Witkoff, who visited St. Petersburg and met with Putin. And still, unfortunately, he remains in this position after the horrific Russian terrorist strike and his visit. After that, he was in Iran, and the US has effectively made concessions to Iran and is ready to continue negotiations. And he needs to inform President Trump about this. Then we'll see what Trump says, what his reaction will be. But for now, it remains unchanged. Negotiations with Russia must continue, despite everything. And for now, a tougher stance is not to be expected. We'll see. It might change as Trump changes his viewpoints. But that's how it is. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian defense forces are doing everything to destroy the enemy, stop their advance, and do everything to protect all of us. So let's support our army, unite, and consolidate. And with confidence and God's help, we move only forward. Take care of yourselves. Glory to Ukraine.